Here's an interesting, albeit slightly irrelevant wine fact for you. 70% of all of the fair trade wines in the entire world come from South Africa. Now, we've been pondering fair trade because at the Hendricks Solar Wine Club, we've been exploring a number of producers who are involved in social upliftment or environmental initiatives. And we've also been zeroing in on initiatives within the South African wine industry that are not just interested in sharing profit with employees, but also with the actual transfer of land ownership, which is a whole new level of transformation. And perhaps two of the foremost examples that we've covered are the Adama Trust and the Bosman family wines, and also the Tokozani operation, which is connected to Demersfontein in Wellington. Both of these are fairly large-scale, very impressive examples of how to do the project well. Of course, one of the prerequisites for us covering these sorts of producers is not just that they have great stories of upliftment, but that the team involved are actually able to produce wines of incredible quality. And we can say that without a doubt of the two aforementioned projects. But this is all relevant because today's Hendricks Solar Wine of the Day is an absolutely stellar Cabernet Franc, which is produced by another company that operates in a similar way, and that is Great Heart Wines. The winemaker who made today's wine of the day is Gynore Hendricks. Incidentally, if you want to stay up to speed with these sorts of producers or just general wine geekery, chemistry, science and history, then make sure that you subscribe to the Hendricks Solar YouTube channel, where we have almost 400 videos just like this one. And give us a like because it really does help more people to discover our content. The Great Heart Wine brand is a company that operates entirely on its own, where 100% of its shares are owned by employees of either Mullineux Wines or Leo Passant family wines who have been with those companies for 2 years or more. And there isn't one single dominant majority shareholder, but rather the shares are apportioned through all of the aforementioned employees in accordance with how long they have been with the company. The employees also get to be directors on the board, which I guess it's kind of like saying if the Swartland was Gotham City, then the employees of Mullineux and Leo Passant would get a chance to be both John Daggett and Bruce Wayne. Or I guess if you prefer the classics, then it's like saying that the employees of these companies get to be at one point citizens of Middle Earth and therefore on the Council of Elrond, discussing and giving insight into what is best for the citizens of Middle Earth. But then they also get to take turns being part of the Fellowship of the Ring, where they're actually making executive decisions on how the ring gets to Mordor, except the ring is wine and Mordor is the wine-loving public of the world. And I say taking turns because each department within Great Heart gets to have a director on the board at a certain time, whether it is someone from the winery at one point, or perhaps the vineyard team, or the warehouse, or the sales department. And then, of course, it's not completely floating off all on its own, because Andrea Mullineux, who is herself an incredibly decorated winemaker, and her husband, Chris, who is the viticultural brain behind the whole operation, they operate as directors on the board as well and give insight and advice where it is needed. The head winemaker at Great Heart is Gynore Hendricks, and she is a graduate of the rather prestigious Cape Winemakers Guild Protégé program. And she's managed to be mentored by some absolute giants in the industry. First of all, Charles Hopkins, who is the massive, oversized chemistry brain behind the incredible de Grendel wines and an absolute Sauvignon Blanc expert. But she's also worked under Miles Mossop, who was really the winemaker who first put the Stellenbosch estate of Takara on the kind of global wine map, and he in his own right has an incredibly broadly celebrated range of wines under the name Miles Mossop. And if those two weren't enough, she is now mentored by Andrea Mullineux, who has been part of the team that was Platz's Winery of the Year on a number of occasions, has won countless Platzer 5-star awards, has been declared an international global winemaker of the year. At some point, she really is a giant in her own right. So in one sense, it would be really hard for Gynore not to have absorbed some of the genius around her. But perhaps a skeptic might say, well, if you are surrounded by such huge personalities of such an enormous level of talent, perhaps it's quite hard to be able to develop your own identity. So it might comfort you to know that actually she gets given quite a lot of freedom at Great Heart. And for example, the project of the Great Heart Elgin Pinot Noir was entirely spearheaded by her on her own. And ultimately the winemaking decisions at Great Heart, they stop with her. If things go wrong, it's on her. But to prevent that, Andrea is there to give insight and advice wherever it's needed. Something that's quite interesting to note is that the Leeuwpersant winemaker, Kelsey Shanking, has now recently become a shareholder at Great Heart. So it'll be interesting to see how she comes in and works alongside Gynore, perhaps making wines of a slightly different ilk. But enough talk about mentors and history and pedigree and proteges. The question we want to ask is, has she learned anything? Can she make wines? I mean, we know she's won a whole number of Platter 5-star awards for herself, but let's get into the glass and taste what we think of her winemaking skills. Now, when we give this a sniff, well, it certainly does nothing to change my impression that Cabernet Franc is one of the most exciting wines coming out of South Africa at the moment. It has these beautiful elements of ripe, sweet blackcurrant down the core, and then kind of slightly redder cherry elements as well. And then over the top of that is a beautiful, I guess like fresh picked tobacco leaf, which admittedly, look, if you've never visited a tobacco farm, that's a slightly obscure flavor note. So break down fresh tobacco leaf. It's kind of like a mixture of fresh earth and an element of maybe pepper spice in there, and that's woven in with some sweeter herbal leafy elements, perhaps thyme, a little bit of sage. There's definitely a mix of earth and sweetness and a touch of spice, and you put those together and you have freshly picked tobacco. But if you don't believe me, just go find a tobacco farm. And then over above the fruit, the cherry, the blackcurrant, the tobacco leaf, you also have a lovely gentle touch of violet florals. And so to summarize, this is what makes Cabernet Franc so engaging, especially coming out of South Africa, is that you've got this kaleidoscope and it's all so distinct. You've got your vegetal notes, you've got your fruit notes, you've got spice, you've got florals, and they all sit together and present a beautifully regal example of what the cultivar can be. But let's get into the glass and give it a sip and see what's on the palate. Well, the fruit elements we mentioned really travel very faithfully onto the palate. So you have the sweeter blackcurrant in the middle, and then the cherry note is perhaps more like a cherry kirsch liqueur as opposed to being fresh cherries. So it's a slightly sweeter, slightly spicier version of cherry. And then when it comes to the structure, this wine is by no means big boned. In fact, I'd say it's medium bodied at best. Now, in the textbook definition, Cabernet Franc tannins are always softer than Cabernet Sauvignon, but usually a little bit bolshier than perhaps Merlot. And in contrast, it has less kind of fleshiness than Merlot, and generally it's lighter in impression than something like a Cabernet Sauvignon. And that's exactly what we get here. I mean, the tannins are beautifully silky and soft, and they are so refined. And what I mean by refined tannins is that when grapes have slightly raw tannins, it tastes like a tea bag or like raw plant material. It's astringent and it's abrasive, but as the grapes ripen, so your tannins ripen, and that's what phenolic ripening is. And so the sensation in your mouth when you're drinking the wine is less of green fruit or unripe banana or plant cellulose, and it becomes more kind of like a gentler, softer kind of chalk powder. And I guess what you get then is a gentle drying sensation rather than a planty, bitter, herbal, astringent sensation. But the thing on this wine is that gentle drying sensation is perfectly balanced by the juicy elements from the blackcurrant and the cherry kirsch. And I guess that is what it means to have a wine in harmony or a wine in balance, because your juicy fruit leans up against your slightly drying tannins, and in between is a beautiful touch of herbal complexity, which really I think should be enough to satisfy even your trickiest of dinner guests. Now that's all we have time for today, but I have left links to 2 videos, both of which explore some really exciting South African Cabernet Francs, just to give you a slightly deeper idea of what's happening with this cultivar in South Africa. One of them is made in the Helderberg from an estate of Morgenster, which has been around for centuries, but is experiencing something of a revival. And the other one is produced by possibly one of my favorite Cabernet Franc wards in Stellenbosch, which is Bunghoek, right up in the kind of top right-hand corner of Stellenbosch. And that's made by an estate called Zorgvliet. So really watch both of those videos and it'll give you an idea of what's possible with this amazing cultivar in this exciting new world producing country.